My name is Daniel Reznik, and this is the Getting Out of the Way podcast, where we will be
good.
integrating the
Universe knows better anyway.
psychedelic
Here we are.
experience.
Yeah.
So just for the benefit of myself and anyone else who doesn't know who you are, a quick setup. Who are we talking to?
Sure. So I'm Alex, 31. I wrote a book called Trauma and Ecstasy, How Psychedelics Made My Life Worth Living, that came out in December and is doing pretty well reviews-wise for Amazon. And the book is about how I use psychedelics to heal from childhood sexual abuse and sort of all the physical manifestations that were coming up for me as an adult around that. And then I tried a bunch of different Western modalities to kind of work through that. Doctors, physical therapists, acupuncturists, and nothing was working. And then I turned to MDMA assisted psychotherapy. And it turned out I had a bunch of repressed sexual trauma from when I was very little. And that's sort of when my story started changing and growing. And that's what my book is about. And that's kind of my story. And I'm obviously happy to answer any questions based off that.
That's a powerful encapsulation. There's a lot there. I guess it would be great to kind of like unpack it a little bit. Like, how did this process start? And when I say process, I don't know that it ever starts or ends, this journey of ours. But with regard to authoring this book, right, what do you feel was the catalyst to getting you to kind of pick up a pen and put it to paper?
Sure. So there were a couple different things. I tried to hold my abuser accountable through legal channels, and that did not go very well. And he remains at a school now. And so my hope with the book, one of my hopes, and certainly at the beginning, this was a very motivational factor, was to try to continue to hold him accountable and hoping that my book would sort of spur action in my community and that was a big motivator. I'm not going to pretend that wasn't a motivator. But there were a couple other things as well. And I think as I got deeper in the process, those kind of became more of a centerpiece, and holding them accountable kind of became less important to me. But I do really want to help others who have been through this, and people that have childhood trauma to begin with, and which unfortunately I think is a lot of people. Obviously, trauma is a broad term, and no one's quite sure, what is trauma, what isn't trauma. But I do think everybody sort of agrees that, childhood sexual abuse definitely counts as trauma. And there's a lot of people that have really dealt with that and are struggling now. And I think that my hope with this book is I can spur a conversation. I can encourage people to get help. I can encourage people to use psychedelics as these tools for healing and growth. And so really helping people with childhood abuse in particular, particularly sexual abuse, but also physical abuse. And there are a couple other things as well. I'm not sure what I want to do next as a career, and actually looking for roles now. What drives me, and my hope would perhaps through speaking or coaching and then the other thing I would say is this is a very traumatic period in my life. I think a life-defining period. And so I think it's shown to be therapeutic to kind of write all this stuff down and sort of have it as a record for kind of posterity, I guess would be the right word, and kind of for healing. And so I think by having all this documented and what I went through and what I was feeling and how I got through it and what happened, I can really sort of it doesn't make the pain go away. It doesn't make what happened change, but I think it kind of takes the power off of it and kind of gives me a sense of closure and peace maybe that I might not have had I not written a book about that. So all four of those things were pretty big motivators for me to write this book. And so I really try to do my best with it. And we're seeing what happens, and we'll continue to see what happens.
Right on. Thank you. You mentioned that the pain is present. The pain doesn't go away. And I think that's something that, a lot of us deal with in our own way, regardless of what the source of trauma is, in that the healing process could be never ending. We can get caught in this kind of cyclical heal, rinse, repeat process that has us kind of engage with that historic record more than perhaps we need to. There's, something to be said about this process of letting go. And a lot of the times these healing pathways help us with that so we can kind of escape that self-imposed narrative. I wondered, I haven't had the benefit of reading your book. I most definitely will. Perhaps for my benefit, for anyone who's listening, as challenging as it may be, can you provide like a Cliff Notes version of your book?
Sure. So yeah, I think at the beginning, it kind of walks through all the physical challenges I was facing. I had a bad pelvic floor problem issues, muscle tension, and all the different modalities I tried. I even put a stick where you really don't want to put a stick to try to calm down the pelvic muscles with a pelvic floor therapist, and kind of walks through all that and all the crazy stuff I tried and how desperate I was and how much pain I was in. And so that's sort of the beginning. And then it's sort of pretty quickly turns into why I got into MDMA therapy and how I heard about it, and then what happened there, and then all the repressed trauma that came out, and sort of what actually happened during my childhood. Unfortunately, I was badly abused by a teacher and someone that I trusted, an authority figure. And so sort of walking through, how that happened, the kind of tactics and manipulations he used to kind of abuse me at a very young age, and how he managed to kind of accomplish that. But at the same time, and how traumatic it was for me. But at the same time, it sort of flips back and forth between that and sort of all the therapeutic work I did with my shaman in Austin, and kind of us doing psychedelics together, and how I sort of really began to heal from this crazy trauma. And so I think it's kind of a contrast, because, all the bad things that happened, then all the modalities and tactics and people I used to help me heal. And then a kind of subplot of that is me trying to hold him accountable. I did go to the police. I did write an open letter to my school system naming him. And so all the kind of tactics I used, and, I'm not to try to spoil the ending, but he's unfortunately still at a school now. So it was unsuccessful so far. But we'll see what happens there. But I think by the end of the book, I've sort of forgiven him. I've sort of accepted that this happened, but also that it won't define me, and sort of try to move on and live a better life. And I think there'll always be scars from what happened, but by doing the psychedelics, by doing the integration work, by doing the healing work, I've managed to be in a much better place than when I started. And I think that's all you can really do, right?
Yeah, I'm super glad to hear that. Yes, that is all we can do in a way. I wanted to ask, how did you first get introduced to MDMA as a healing pathway?
Sure. So I'd heard from some prominent people that had used MDMA to heal their own traumas. Tim Ferriss would be a big example. He unfortunately was also sexually abused as a child, and he did a big podcast about how he used MDMA and psilocybin therapy to sort of work through that trauma, as well as some other modalities. And, I'm a fan of Tim's, and so that was very influential on me. And then Tucker Max as well. I talked a lot about his MDMA and psychedelic experiences. And so I actually reached out to Tucker for a guide several years ago now. And he referred me to someone in New York City that I worked with initially. And then indirectly, I found someone through him in Austin as well, who I've had a lot of success with, and a lot of, I guess what's the right word, rapport with. And we've done a lot of sessions together.
And how many sessions, given your experience, did it take for you to start kind of getting down to an aspect of the process that you would consider really kind of healing? Because in the beginning, a lot of stuff comes up, and sometimes that's more challenging, having to relive it and having to face it all over again in a more kind of, meaningful, eyes open fashion. And that could be very difficult. It is very difficult for a lot of people. And it takes time. And sometimes people think that it's a kind of one and done thing. They feel that when perhaps some of the heavier experiences start to rise, that some people feel like it's more than what they bargained for. They thought, kind of with the Western model of take a pill, this is going to get fixed, and then you're good to go. There's more that's required of us here. These aren't kind of the easy ways out. These are the toughest ways out, because we really have to confront ourselves in a very meaningful way. So it's kind of the opposite of Western medicine. And not all of us are prepped and primed for that, right? And so some people have a very, very challenging time, especially in the beginning. So in your experience, what do you think, what did that arc kind of look like, to the point where, from where we start to the point where we say that, oh, okay, something's working here, something's clicking, I'm starting to get down to it, starting to feel better, starting to change? So rewind me for 1 second, back to the MDMA. Like, you hear about MDMA, you feel that it's a pathway you would like to pursue, you do your research, you get comfortable with it, you get connected to somebody who's in the space, you engage with them, and then you have your first experience.
Yeah, so I think I had a first experience that was tough, but didn't seem that bad. I had a second experience where I blacked out most of the session, and that's still maybe probably the toughest psychedelic experience I've ever had. And I was a total mess and having panic attacks. After my fourth session, it became clear I'd been badly sexually abused by my teacher, like I said. And then after 6 sessions, I decided to start transitioning to mushrooms. This was a very difficult year. This is all over the course of a year, so it was very unfun. It was really not a good time at all. But I think at this point I've done 20 something sessions, and I would say the first 10 to 12 were pretty miserable pretty much the entire time.
Wow.
They sucked big time. And I think after that they only sucked part of the time. But I'm still having stuff come up now, even not in the same way, but just things about me and things I'm working through. But really the first 10 to 12 were really miserable. It was very taxing, and I think it will always be a traumatizing period in my life. And I don't think I'll ever quite forget how difficult those sessions were, but I did get through it, and I am on the other side now, so that's pretty good.
Right. It's this place we draw strength from. So having the opportunity to go through that challenge willingly, right,
Yeah.
and face it down and come out the other end really is a source of strength and inspiration, not only for yourself, but for everyone who hears your story. So that's wonderful. And like we said, the journey continues. I want to also, I would love to just kind of separate you mentioned different medicines. I would love to kind of separate them a little bit to get a better understanding. When you began your healing process using the MA specifically, you were working with a guide. What does guidance within the kind of MDMA experience look and feel like for someone who doesn't know? Is it kind of assisted talk therapy? Are there other aspects of that session that you'd like to share that could help better kind of inform people who don't know about it?
Can be assisted talk therapy if you want to talk. So generally what happens is the facilitators usually have their own space. It looked kind of like a psychiatrist's office. There was a bed. She had a small dog. I sat on the bed with an eye mask on. Music started playing in the background once the medicine started kicking in. And then, there was a lot of shaking and sort of somatic release. And that's literally letting go of trauma and bad energy stuck in your body. And that bad energy leads to like anger. It leads to physical problems like autoimmune disorders or muscle tension, like I was talking about. And that it's really just toxic energy that needs to go. Because what happens during trauma is, especially as a kid, it's very hard to process deep trauma. So what happens is you sort of store it inside your body, and it sort of just sits in your subconscious, and it kind of sometimes it'll rear its head. When you see people screaming at like service workers, I think a lot of times they're really just mad about stuff that happened a long time ago when they were kids, and that just comes out in your day-to-day life as an adult if you don't work through it. So I had a big anger problem before I started doing psychedelics, and I look at it and I just think a lot of it was that sadness and that anger that all this horrible happened to me. So anyway, the point being is, so in terms of the session, the guide is generally not going to talk to you unless you talk to them first. But if you want to talk the whole time, I guess they can talk back. One problem that I had at the beginning was my ego was doing a lot of deflecting. And the way I was doing that was I was talking a lot and asking a lot of questions that really were not that relevant to the experience. Like, when is this going to be over? When did it start? How long is this going to be? Where am I? Or like, what's up with the room? Is it too cold? Is it too hot? And that's really deflecting from the deep, painful emotions you don't want to feel, right? Because by
Right.
asking all these questions, it almost distracts yourself from why are you here? What is coming up for me, right? So does
That's
that
right.
does that all make sense?
Oh, that's spot on.
Yeah, so I think my ego very strong, and even now there's still some ego deflection at times, but I've gotten a lot better, and I think it's probably good to talk less, especially
Hmm.
to the guide. I think there are times where I still got to get some stuff out, and like I still got to say some stuff out loud, but I do think a lot of this can be done internally yourself. And I used to be a real chatterbox in these MDMA sessions in particular, and I think that was not great for me, especially when I'm deep in the medicine. So I think that was a way my ego deflected. So yeah, that's generally what the session looks like. It can be like 5 to 6 hours from start to finish, and yeah, then it just usually process after a little bit with the guide as you start coming down, like what happened in there, what was that like for you? Are you okay? And there'll be some fruit, and you'll eat. And usually I usually don't feel like eating much after medicine, And yeah, then, eventually I go home and kind of start processing myself. What happened in there? What was I feeling? What came up for me? How's my body doing? Because, I usually do a lot of somatic shaking. That's PTSD, letting go, like I said before. So yeah, that's sort of what the session is like. And I'm obviously happy to answer any more questions about it.
The preparatory period, how prepared were you going into your session prior to that first one?
I was pretty unprepared, to be honest. It's recommended that you have a talk therapist you're seeing beforehand and sort of start working through stuff that might come up for you. But I don't know. I just sort of went in cold. But honestly, I was very dissociated at that time. I was pretty messed up. I was not getting very much out of therapy. I really wasn't talking very much in a therapeutic setting as well. And then I went all the way in to start and then started working through stuff after that. So, but again, it's recommended to have a talk therapist. It's recommended to do some journaling. It's recommended to do a lot of time in nature. I started doing all that stuff after the session, but before the session, I really wasn't doing anything.
And so if you can go back and give yourself some advice prior to that first session, would you emphasize that preparatory period, or do you still feel kind of like it played out the way you would have it if you did it again?
It played out the way it was going to play out. I would tell myself this is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done in your life, and there are going to be many times you want to quit, and this is going to really suck. But it'd be
Then
great
you
for
probably
you.
don't go through with it if you hear that.
Yeah, but it'd be great. It's important for you to do it anyway, and this is going to change your life in a positive way over time. But again, I think if I'd really known how bad it was going to be before I started, I'm not sure I ever would have done it. So I'm
I
really
mean,
actually happy.
bad maybe in the moment, but now looking back on it, you see all the value. So you'd probably reclassify it at this point, right? So it wouldn't necessarily be bad, but I hear you. And it was kind of a loaded question because I want to make sure that people understand, if they're hearing this, you and I perhaps might have different perspectives because of our, let's say, range of experience. But a lot of individuals who are looking at these tools for healing, you know, a lot of folks are hurting so bad that they don't necessarily think that they have the time or capacity to run any process other than, take the medicine and get well, even though that's not kind of how it works. And for some people, like you said, like yourself included, sometimes we just have to kind of jump in and then figure our way around things. But for a lot of people, that preparatory period is mighty helpful. I actually think that the medicine session starts once we have that inspiration to actually even approach those healing pathways. And that's really kind of when it starts up. And so, if I can caution anyone, I would say that take the preparatory process as seriously as you can, because that in and of itself is medicine. It is a way that the healing can begin, and we can actually do a lot of the, perhaps I don't want to, I'd say superficial work, but I think it's deeper than that. But we can start to kind of prime ourselves for those experiences before they even begin, in a way that allows the experience itself to kind of begin at a perhaps even deeper stage. And I've experienced this myself and with others. I ask you the question just to kind of get your sense of things in terms, perhaps again, just it's my own kind of selfish way of highlighting that preparatory period and how important it could be. But you touched on a lot that I would call kind of integration, everything from journaling to processing afterwards. And I think integration is also key because we've been so trained on the Western style of healthcare. We think that a pill is the end all be all solution when we know it's not. And we know oftentimes those pills and kind of symptomatic approaches to healing don't address the causal level of things. And that's really where we do the work, so to speak. And so the preparation is key, the integration is key, the experience is very central to the process, no doubt. But I just want to be clear with anyone who's listening, it's not the thing in and of itself. It's an aspect of it. It's a spoke on the wheel. And there are other spokes, and we have to kind of honor them equally and accordingly to maximize our journey of self-discovery, of healing. And so if you can just kind of give me a sense of that integration process. I see your book as an aspect of your integration, right? Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
And can you mentioned journaling. The book is kind of a byproduct of that written exercise, I guess. What other integration tools would you say were beneficial to you?
Sure. So I see energy kind of holotropic breath work practitioner every week in Austin, and we work together and do breath work and kind of have some of those feelings and emotions from the session come up and sort of help me process them and let go of stuff. And so that's the biggest thing I do. I also see an intimacy coach because I have a lot of difficulties around kind of all that comes with that. And so an intimacy coach has really helped me with that. I was doing EMDR or eye movement desensitization reprocessing for a while, where you kind of look at it's almost like a hypnosis technique where she goes from side to side and you're looking with your eyes and there's doing some stuff with buzzers. And the idea is by activating different parts of the brain, it can sort of help process traumatic memories. And I also was seeing a body worker for a long time, and we were kind of trying to activate different parts of my body that may have been sort of stuck in freeze or in trauma, and kind of getting more in touch with myself and my body while I was almost thawing myself out through these psychedelic sessions. So those are some of the biggest things I was doing. I was also doing acupuncture. I also was doing group men's work with other men who had been sexually abused in the Austin area. And then I try to sleep well. I don't always succeed in that, but I really try to make sleep a priority. I don't drink a lot of caffeine. I don't eat late. I try not to have all my lights dimmed by 7, 8 o'clock at night. Trying to look at a ton of blue light. So I do all that. I try to eat well, heavy protein diet, and kind of less sugar, so less carbohydrates. So that's something I almost like a paleo style diet. So that's something I follow as well. And then I try to get a ton of exercise, particularly walking. I think walking is really transformational for me as a thinking time. I don't meditate, but I do walk everywhere. And I think that walking serves as almost a meditation like aspect for me to get in touch with my thoughts, feelings, and ideas and sort of how things are going. And so that's something I try to do every day. And then I'm also trying to incorporate more of a strength kind of routine into my protocol now. And I think strength training is something I've been sort of missing because my body's been really hurting for a long time. But something I definitely, as my body is thawed out, is something I want to incorporate more of in the future.
So it's interesting, everything that you mentioned, for me, these are other medicines. These are other spokes on that wheel of healing. And when I think, and they are all, I think, equally powerful, especially when we approach them with proper intention. I think for me personally, when it comes down to integration, some of the aspects of these medicine sessions, they can be quite abstract, they can be quite profound. I look at integration as kind of taking those aspects and kind of turning them into kind of practical takeaways that I could use on a daily basis. Obviously, they work in conjunction with all of those other healing pathways that you mentioned. But when it comes to integration specifically, it almost seems like taking all of this data that's available to us, not only through the medicine session, but through kind of just the outside world at large, and integrating them on an internal basis, right? So I can kind of, again, free myself up so I can let go of some of that personal narrative that's still lingering around, that still has me, I would say, kind of trapped within it. And integration is kind of also another step that we don't necessarily give a lot of value to at least in terms of kind of the way that we were brought up. We keep pointing to Western medicine, Western kind of lifestyle and mindset associated with just, taking a solution and letting that solution address all aspects of our healing process. So I guess, when it comes to integration, what, if any, of the tools that you mentioned would you feel helped you as much as some of those medicines did? If you could point to one or two that were really kind of, that you think were super beneficial for you.
Sure. I would say the energy breath work I do every week with a practitioner has been the most transformational for me. It really helps me get in touch with my thoughts and feelings and sort of emotions. And I think that's been huge and kind of a way to best integrate, because it's almost like a psychedelic experience. If you start heavy breathing for 20 minutes on a table with someone and you sort of feel almost those deep and intense emotions coming up again. And so I think it's a way to sort of process, but in a less intense way than doing like a full-on psychedelic session. And then the second thing I would say right now anyway is definitely the intimacy work I'm doing. I really struggle with kind of that physical touch and sort of that maybe feeling of closeness to someone, in a physical sense more than even an emotional sense. I think working with someone in a safe, supportive environment has been really transformational for me in terms of getting more in touch with my body, getting more kind of feeling more comfortable with physical intimacy. So I think those are the big two things I'm working on right now. But honestly, all the things I mentioned have been transformational at different points in my journey.
And when we made the transition from MDMA to psilocybin, were those guided sessions, or were you, for the most part, processing on your own?
They were all guided sessions. I've actually never taken a large dose of psychedelics by myself. That's really not something I'm interested in doing at all in the near future. I take these medicines in a therapeutic setting because I think that's where a lot of the healing comes from, is being seen and heard by someone around you, even if you're not really personally engaging with them. And so I think that's been really important part of my journey, is to do this all therapeutically. And I don't think it would have been effective. And I actually think it would have set me back, and I would have gotten really freaked out had I tried to do any of this stuff, by myself in a non-guided way.
Got it.
It'd been almost 3.5 years into my psychedelic world that could be really kind of scary, but ultimately healing and productive.
Do you think it's dose dependent? I typically don't compare the medicines. They're very unique on their own, but I also recognize that when we get into kind of conversations about what's more effective or stronger, or how does this feel, or how does that feel, it's tough without having the experience. But having the experience, it seems like that there is something to be said about not only the dose, but the amount of surrender that we bring to the table, because we can work with these medicines, and if we don't kind of surrender into them, we bring a lot of resistance. It doesn't necessarily matter how much what the dose was, or what our setting is, if we're fighting it every way. And so that's where that preparation kind of has some benefit, right? If we're prepared to kind of be guided by these medicines, and we kind of are comfortable, and we're feeling safe, and we're ready to kind of let go with the proper intention, we can do a lot of beautiful work. But sometimes, again, it's not exclusively the dose. What are your thoughts on that? Like, was it always about the dose, or did you recognize that as you progressed, that the amount of, let's say, softness and gentleness that you brought to your experience kind of had an equal impact on what the output was?
Yeah, I think at the beginning I had a really hard time surrendering, and I still do in certain respects. And so I've done a lot of medicine, like a lot of high doses, but I think I really needed that. I have a very strong ego structure, and that's because I had a lot of difficult things happen. And sort of to compensate for that, I really started looking, I think my brain really kind of went inward and went very, and that kind of trauma shapes how you perceive things and how you perceive the world and how you think, and that really kind of shaped me almost like a clenched fist in my, in much the same way my pelvis, my ego structure is very tight, very limited, not very flexible, not very pliable. And so I think in doing medicine, I've softened, and that softness has showed up in my relationships, that softness has shown up in my, how I perceive the world, how I used to be very angry and now I'm much less angry, things like that. But I think at the beginning it was very hard for me, and so I needed a lot of medicine. I did a lot of high dose of mushrooms, I think as much as 10 grams or whatever, so which is no joke at all, and very much you need that in a guided dose. Like, I couldn't have gotten up during that. But I do think as you kind of, at the beginning, if there's a lot of resistance, a lot of medicine can be needed to sort of get to that next level and kind of maybe not overpower, but sort of
That's a
remind
good
you.
word.
Yeah, because I do think if you really don't want to heal, then I think no amount of medicine will be enough. If you're
Right.
really determined not to do this work, then it won't matter. But at the same time, for me, I wanted to heal, but there was also a shit ton of resistance. So I think those things combine. That's why I need a lot of medicine.
So you're saying less resistance now. Do you have experience, or do you feel like subsequent medicine journeys will start to taper that dose down?
I still did two cups of Aya last time I did Aya. I think I'll probably stay at 2 cups for a while. But I think eventually there will be a point where I will need less. Yeah.
Yeah, I also, again, selfishly want to highlight that, because we see some people get caught up in the medicine space, because you know you can heal forever, really. Once we tackle our own stuff, there's an unlimited supply of suffering in this world that we could nominate ourselves to kind of go heal. And so it's a little sticky, the space, right? Especially if I haven't experienced, pardon me, any other healing modality that perhaps quite threads the needle the way that these plant medicines do, then I think that the only way to get that level of healing is through plant medicine, and then it can become a crutch for some people. And I also kind of, want to provide a little kind of caution for anyone who is listening in that, these healing modalities are medicines, right? And we use medicine when we're sick, but when we get well from using the medicine, right, we want to kind of transition, let's say, to vitamins, right, which are preemptive and proactive that keep me from getting sick. Like you said, you've made all these lifestyle changes, and those are kind of these preemptive moves to ward off any future potential illness, right? And so at that point, if I recognize myself as being well, I don't necessarily need medicine. The idea is these plants, they don't want us to get caught up in them as gatekeepers to self-actualization and healing. They want to kind of show us how to do it on our own. So that way they can kind of fall back and we can start the next stage of our but it is very easy to over-identify these tools as being the only tools and the exclusive tools of deep healing. And so through this process, I think that if they teach us surrender properly, and if we could integrate surrender and we bring that level of surrender and compassion to our day-to-day life, then perhaps that surrender plus healthy intention, like you said, nothing will heal us until we make the decision that we want to heal. So the combination of wanting to heal and being gentle with ourselves and surrendering to ourselves will allow this work to continue in a fashion that perhaps doesn't require the plant medicine. Maybe, like you identified, everything from breath work to conscious or mindful walking becomes a medicine all its own, so long as that I'm surrendered to that process with proper intention. And so I just wanted to kind of, get your feedback on that as your journey continues, how that gentleness with self, that surrender to self, to our higher self, how that impacts your decision making in terms of how to use medicine, when to use medicine, and what is medicine in the first place.
Sure. So I think I had a lot of self-loathing before, but it was really bad when I started doing medicine. I think it led me to make a lot of decisions that were not very, I guess, not very healthy for me. I really had trouble with self-care, and I was always trying to running myself ragged. I was not eating that much. I was making some bad decisions at work, in the sense that I kind of went for jobs I knew weren't a good fit for me for certain reasons. And so all that was sort of coming up before. But I think now that I like myself more, it's definitely easier to do things that I enjoy. It's easier to do things that I think are a bit good for me without, feeling bad about it. Like, I go to the sauna now, which I enjoy, and I would have thought was like too expensive before. I eat better food, and honestly, some of it is not super cheap. Like eating nice meat is not like, not free. But I think it's worth it, and I think that sort of self-care aspect has been really good for me.
You mentioned the sauna. It's a great healing modality. The sauna forces us kind of into this state of surrender, right? You hang out there long enough and it starts to get kind of overwhelming. And the first thing that happens is the mind starts racing and starts telling us stories like, get out of here. I can't handle it. It's too much. And it, wants us to exit stage left very, very quickly. But then if we can kind of chill and hear that unwinding of the mind go down without following it, right? And we can just kind of stick to it. We recognize on the other end of that, there's a level of peacefulness, a level of clarity, a level of openness that allows all of this stuff that we've been harboring to come up. So in that way, the sauna is a very powerful medicine, right? If we come to the sauna with proper intention, proper surrender, it can get us to those same kind of points of awareness, much like breath work, much like psychedelics. It's all kind of forcing us into submission, right? So that we can kind of get out of the way. And that healing process can happen naturally on its own, the way this body-mind complex is designed to really kind of heal itself, so long as that we're not inhibiting the process. And so, again, just a reminder that, these are all very powerful medicines. Maybe it takes plant medicine to recognize and realize that life at large is medicine, right? And if we kind of open ourselves up to that possibility, there is profound healing available in every single breath that we take. And you mentioned meditation, which is, a super powerful tool, and we recognize its power just by sitting down, closing our eyes, and trying to stay there for a moment. And that mind kind of turns on right away, just like in the sauna, and starts telling us about, what we should be doing, why this isn't working, why it's a bad idea, and this isn't for me. And, there's this bill to pay, and then the whole kind of just the mental sequence begins. And whenever that happens, that always kind of reminds me that perhaps we're onto something. The mind wouldn't be racing as it does if there was not something on the other end of the experience. And then we just kind of, again, just like with the sauna, we breathe through it and we kind of just keep sitting there and we watch what comes up. You mentioned meditation isn't on your radar for the moment in terms of a healing pathway, but do you have any experience with it? Is there something that kind of either turned you off to it, or perhaps you're not ready for? Anything you can share on that?
Yeah, it's just always something I've had a hard time with. It's not something I really enjoy, but I do think
Do you
having some.
enjoy medicine?
No, that's true. That's a good point. But I do think there are other ways to sort of get into that meditation space without actually having to meditate. I've heard jujitsu.
Absolutely.
Jujitsu is a really good one for some people because if you aren't focused on exactly the present here and now, you'll get your butt kicked. So I think that's been good for some people. Swimming, I've heard it can be really good. Walking is kind of my meditation like practice. Journaling can be for some people, but something to get in touch with your thoughts and feelings. Whether that's quote unquote meditation or not, I actually think is sort of irrelevant, but something that you can kind of get in touch with how you're feeling deep inside and sort of explore those thoughts in a non-judgmental way, I think is really important.
Yeah, these everything is indeed meditation. And when I point to it, I don't exclusively point to kind of, the formal meditation that we envision of someone, sitting in lotus with their palms up. I
Yeah.
do think that meditation points more at a state of being, not a function. I think the function gets you to that awareness that we are always in meditation when we're not busy listening to our mind's narrative. So I'm glad you pointed that out. One thing I would like to ask you about, I read an interview that you did, and you said that it got worse before it got better, which kind of sounds like the dark night of the soul that a lot of people speak about and write about. That's a challenging part of this experience, this journey. And we have to be ready for it, because if we're not ready for it, going through that, especially, unguided, or perhaps even with a guide that doesn't have a range of experience that can lend itself to our process, gets a lot of people psyched out. And I see a lot of people, myself included, that have a hard time through that process. What words can you share with us on that part of your experience?
Yeah, things absolutely got worse before they get better. I think that's sort of inevitable when you're doing this work a little bit because all the things you've kind of pushed down and pushed inside will come up if you keep doing medicine. So again, I think that's why a lot of people stop after once or twice. They see some shit that scares them and it's like, I'm good. This is far enough. And I wanted to go deeper. I felt like I had to go deeper to kind of get to the root of my physical problems and kind of emotional issues. And so, I've done a lot of sessions, and I think if you do a lot of sessions, shit will come up. But, I think I'm on the other side of that for the most part now, and things have gotten better for me. But I do think a dark night of the soul, particularly if you have a lot of trauma in your life, and I think a lot of people coming to medicine work do, or they wouldn't be that interested in a lot of cases in the first place. But I think it's very good for trauma. I think it can be used for trauma in a very deep and comprehensive way, in a way that a lot of other trauma modalities don't touch as well, whether that's traditional talk therapy or sort of EMDR or some of the other ones. But again, I think it can be very dark, and it probably will be very dark at the beginning if you have a lot of trauma and a lot of fear. And, you can run away from that or you can kind of push through that. And I chose to push through that. And at the end of the day, I'm happy that I did.
And when did you notice that it started to kind of quote unquote get better?
There were some pretty subtle shifts. I thought at the beginning there might be like one session where like everything changed for me, and it's like, wow, I'm a whole new guy. And it would feel that way sometimes on medicine, like, wow, this was a big shift. But then, I'd find myself reverting into some of the same patterns in the weeks and months afterwards. So I think over time it was more of a slow, gradual uphill versus like a, huge shift at once. But I do think over time I started noticing changes. People around me started noticing changes. I was a lot happier, a lot more positive. I looked better. I felt better. I slept better. Again, they're very subtle. Things absolutely got worse before they got better. But here I am, almost 4 years into my first journey, and I am feeling much better than I felt going in. That's for sure.
Was there an ebb and flow to the tougher moments transitioning into better moments? Did it cycle back to some difficult experiences again, or was it like just a steady progression?
Absolutely. There's ebb and flow. Unfortunately, I was also sexually abused by a babysitter, and that came up much later after the initial abuse had come up. And once I sort of dealt with that, and it's almost like now that I felt like I was good with that initial horrible stuff, more stuff around the babysitter started coming up later. So, and I guess that's a sign I was good with the first stuff. So, I do think your body, that your mind has an intelligence to it, and it won't come up more than you're ready to handle. But I also think can come up with new, or I guess more trauma once you feel like you've dealt with the maybe the first tranche of trauma. So I look at myself, because I could not have handled everything coming up at once. I think I would have been totally discombobulated and destabilized. But in a more gradual way, I could handle all the trauma that did eventually come up for me.
Interesting. You're a fan of Joseph Campbell's work. Where are you in your hero's journey?
That's a really good question. I'm towards the end. I don't actually remember all the steps. I'd have to go look at them. I know there's like a bunch. But I am very much past like the initial phase and even the medium phase. I would say I'm in the 90 percentile phase. Again, I'd have to look at the actual map of his, but I'm definitely past being the mentor. I'm past, turning away from the call. But there's definitely a couple of things in the back end that I'm still sort of working through.
So you see yourself kind of turning back to the tribe to come deliver some of the precious jewels that were uncovered on your trip. That's very cool.
That sounds right. That sounds about where I am, and I'm based on his sort of paradigm. That makes sense.
So what's next for you?
So I'm actually, I'm sort of in the process of trying to figure out what I'm going to do next. I'm probably going to look for a job. I eventually want to do something entrepreneurial and try to start my own business, but it's been a very tough 5 or 6 years for me. Actually, even longer if you count when my physical symptoms started manifesting, more like 8 years. And so I think having a year or two to kind of quiet down a little bit and sort of not necessarily relax. Like I still want to do important work and work hard, but also I think it's been very tough. Writing this book was very difficult. So I think getting a job would be a good start. And so that's something I'm sort of thinking about now. I think what that I want that to look like. And then I'm still actively doing medicine every couple months. And then I'm still promoting this book through podcasts like this one, through talks that I'm giving, and trying to figure out, what I want my book promotion to sort of look like. What I'm interested in having the book do for me, if anything. Do I want to try to become a speaker? Do I want to try to coach? These are all things I'm considering and sort of uncertain about, and we'll see what happens in 2025 around that.
That's awesome, man. Would like to kind of ask you for a call to action, if if you could. What would be your call to action to anyone who's listening? Because we touched on a lot of subjects, and we can kind of dig into any one of them and expand on any one of them because there was so much there. But if we had to summarize our conversation and boil it down into a call to action so that people out there could be motivated to take a step in their journey, whatever that may look like, what would that be?
Sure. So I think for me, one thing that's really resonated with me is psychedelics have brought up a lot of big questions to me. Like, why are we here? What matters? What doesn't matter? And I don't claim to know the answers to any of that question, but something that's really resonated with me is that we could be here in this life and in these bodies, these souls, to sort of grow and evolve as people or as entities or whatever religious or kind of spiritual connotation. I think it's the main basic point stands that we could be here to grow and evolve. And I think for me, I could not do that until I started working through all the trauma I had. And I think that was really keeping me from growing and evolving as a human being. And I think that now that I've sort of worked through that trauma, it's become easier and it's become a part of my growth and part of my evolution. And so I would challenge anyone, I think for actually I don't want to give a specific challenge because it's sort of up to everyone. But for me, I felt like I really wanted to grow, I really wanted to evolve, and healing trauma through psychedelic therapy has been a huge transformational moment for me in that growth and evolution. And I'm really happy I did it. And I think it's been sort of the shift in the paradigm shift in my life is that growth and evolution. And so I would challenge anyone, I guess, if that's something you want to do, grow and evolve, how do you think you could make that happen? Does moving through trauma, letting go of trauma, working through trauma, is that part of your process? So that's a question I would maybe ask someone.
And so, how about another question? If you were preparing to go into another session, what would be an appropriate intention for you, given the amount of healing that you've already done and the amount of experience that you've already had in this space? Sometimes, if we don't hear the message, we get the message over and over, kind of louder and louder still. And we want to preclude ourselves from having to hear some of these messages louder. So that's why, again, integration, when we hear a message, is so important. So our intention is constantly, I guess, being reshaped after every single session. So again, given your range of experience, if you were coming into your next session, what would your intention look like now?
Sure. My intention is still to heal. I'm still having some physical issues that I want to work through. That are kind of keeping me from living the life I want to be living. Again, they've gotten much better than they were than when I started this process, but I definitely still have some. And in places you don't really want to be having physical issues. So that's very much my intention now, is to heal and grow and evolve through working through that trauma and moving through stuff so I can get kind of my physical body back to where I want it to be. And sort of that would be the main intention at this point, is sort of my body and resetting that. And also I would say I could use a whole on ego reset. I try not to use the word ego death because that sort of has a negative connotation to it, but I could really use a reset. And that's something I've really been looking for in ayahuasca. And that's something I'll probably continue to look for this year when I'm doing medicine.
Yeah, ego's a big loaded word. What does it mean to you? What is the ego?
I think sort of your personality structure, maybe sort of your default setting, your default mode, and how you perceive yourself and the world around you, and kind of how your thoughts generate, and it kind of how your emotions are sort of maybe filtered or modulated or sort of formed. So I think all those things together sort of consist to me of the ego structure.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that, and thank you for your time. Is there anything, any aspect of your book, of your process, that you want to cover that you feel that we haven't touched on?
I don't think so. I think this is pretty comprehensive. I think the book is pretty good. I'm definitely not Tolstoy as a writer, but I did try my best, and I do think it's easy to read in the sense that I try not to use very many big words because I think that's sort of off-putting to people, and it's only about 215 pages. So not super long. But again, there is some tough material in there. So I do want to warn everyone of that as well. If, reading about difficult things happening to someone is not your cup of tea, this is not the right book for you at all. Because there's
Can
some
you
very
show us the
rough.
cover again?
Sure. Trauma and Ecstasy, How Psychedelics Made My Life Worth Living. And the last thing, a couple things I'll say about the book is it's currently 99 cents on Amazon, the ebook. So not a huge lift for most people. And I also say I do have an audiobook as well for people who are more listeners than readers. And I did do it myself. And yeah, so I think all those things together are kind of my selling points to the book. And I promise you it won't be the worst book you've ever read.
Thank you. Do you see another book in your future? Is there more to
No,
say?
no,
No,
I
that
don't
was
think
the one.
so.
Okay.
And certainly not anytime soon. I think books are pretty hard. It was pretty hard to produce. I did use Scribe Media, which is an independent publishing company, and I did pay them a little bit to publish the book. So between all that, and then I'm doing all the marketing myself, and I wrote it all myself with an editor's help. And so it's been a very difficult process really throughout the book. And I think, and again, it's not really a money-making enterprise, so to speak. I sort of did it for more personal and philanthropic reasons. I think to really do a self-published book well, you have to be very committed. And I think on this topic, I was committed, but it's difficult for me to imagine right now another topic that I'm committed enough to write a full book on. So, but we'll see. I mean, I'm not ruling it out permanently, but I am ruling it out in the next couple of years.
Got it. And if there was any question that you could ask the universe, what would that question be? Anything.
I don't know. Maybe why are we here? What does this all mean? I don't know. It's these big questions are sort of I think multi-dimensional. You can interpret them in so many different ways. But then on a personal level, what can I do to sort of get my body back to where I want it to be? What is needed to heal in that way? So I would say I have a personal question and then a more universal, like, what does this all mean question.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for the work that you're doing. It is, I mean, there's no doubt that you're helping other people in a very profound and meaningful way. And that in and of itself is, I mean, it's a gift, right? It's a gift for you. It's a gift for anybody else who benefits from your most challenging experiences. And sharing your story, I think, is, pardon me, so critical. So thank you for doing that. It's not easy. I know it's not easy. I know these sessions are not easy. And I know that people who keep coming back to the grindstone, that continue to work it out through the challenges, through the difficulties, have much to share with our society. And I hope that you continue to inspire people to do that healing work, man. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thanks for the questions. Thanks for the interest in the book. And yeah, anyone else, please feel free to reach out to me, whether that's on Instagram at alex.l.abraham or alex@traumaandecstasy.com. I'm happy to answer any questions around the book that anyone may have. And anyone that's interested, if you want to leave a review for the book on Amazon or Goodreads, I would greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Alex, man. Thank you very much. And I hope to speak to you soon.
Thank you.
All the best, sir.
Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends and family. Subscribe, rate, and share so that we could do our part in spreading the light and diminishing the darkness.